This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 114, The Hypotheticals of Robinson Crusoe Economics.
Hello and welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today, where does money start from and how does it change as we start to deal with more transactions and then start to trade with foreign currencies? Today, for fun, what if Robinson Crusoe was stranded on an island for so long that he decided to invent his own currency? We're going to play a game of hypotheticals with Steve today to try and understand the role of money better, right from the very beginning. That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Now, Geoffrey Robinson, the Aussie human rights barrister who these days lives in London, did a great series of shows on TV called Hypotheticals, where he asked notable guests what they would do in various situations. And he added to the scenario with increasingly complex or very often ridiculous circumstances that would change the decisions that people would make, often very ethical decisions. So I thought we could do that today with Steve. Less a question of ethics, more an opportunity to track the development of money. And look, Steve, we're going to start with Robinson Crusoe on an island with Man Friday, supposedly cut off from the rest of society. I've always wondered about this. Why would Man Friday in the first place be subservient to Robinson Crusoe? I mean, presumably, Man Friday is more muscular. He's been looking after himself. Robinson Crusoe, comes from the West. He's been mollycoddled. Why would Man Friday work for him? Why wouldn't he say, well, excuse me, I'm the boss here?
Well, I think that's often because Robin Crusoe's the one holding the muskets.
Right. Just weapons, basically.
Just weapons.
But, but he has to sleep.
And also, I mean, that's actually one wonderful comment by Arthur C. Clarke, which gives a good background to why this actually tends to happen when you have an isolated community suddenly confronted with the technology of another. And that was Clarke's comment that the technology of any sufficiently advanced culture to ours will appear as magic.
Right.
And if you imagine, if you just imagine the genuine confrontations that occurred when it wasn't, some interesting English fiction like Crusoe, but it was actually Cortez turning up on the shore, and the boats, quite well-armed boats turn up with spears and arrows, and suddenly find that when they're twice as far away as the range of an arrow, they're all starting to fall over from little lead bullets hitting them. And when there's a flash of light at one end, there's somebody dies at their end. Magic. And at that point, you don't regard yourself as equal to them anymore. You fall into believing they're gods. And in fact, that in fact was part of what happened with Montezuma, because the part of their, unfortunately as far as I understand, any Mexicans please correct me, but as I understand, part of the mythology of the Aztecs was the arrival of a white god.
Right. And I guess that's why we have this fixation with science fiction and aliens taking over, because with far greater technology, because that's all we can perceive, because we've done everything we possibly can.
We've done it ourselves. Yeah. It might be a guilt. One of those. What do you call those things when you have a reverse psychology coming back at you, and it's
Well, it's guilt. I think you almost said guilt.
Your own guilt.
Yeah, exactly. So look, and we've got Robinson Crusoe and Man Friday. However that relationship's developed, they're happily making shelter, catching food, cooking it, and living in loincloths in the sunshine. All sounds very idyllic. But then we find Woman Saturday. Who also is going to do work. She's going to make clothes. She's going to do the cooking, because these are obviously the dark ages for women's liberation. So how do we decide then who gets what between Woman Saturday and Man Friday? Robinson Crusoe might then say, look, I'm going to introduce this concept of money as an incentive for you to work hard. The harder you work, the more money you get, and then you can spend that money on, you can buy a day off, or you can buy more food, you can eat more than the other one, you can get access to my solar-powered radio, so you can listen to the BBC World Service and find out what's going on in the world.
I'm not going to even follow up on that one.
How does that change behaviour, though? Because in theory, both of them are going to work harder if I introduce money, aren't they?
Well, that's the argument. In essentially what you put forward is the simplified story that modern monetary theory puts about the origin of money itself, which is to say that the state and we've established the Robinson Crusoe as the state because he's got the muskets, imposes a monetary system to motivate rather than the subsistence behaviour, motivate production for the state's needs, and out of that you get development of money, which then enables a capitalist economy to evolve, which uses money and credit. So that's often the one way in which it's put across, that money came into existence, and this is back to the historical record. Now, I far prefer working in history to fantasy. If you want fantasy, call a neoclassical economist. But
the neoclassical economist is going to love this episode then, because it's pure fantasy. But I'm using it as an excuse for you to give me the history lesson.
Well, the history seems to be, and it's actually quite intriguing. More recent anthropology is making the picture more clouded again. Money has evolved in all sorts of ways in different societies around the world. Sometimes, yes, it was a straight case of the state imposing money. One of the best examples there, and I don't know it as well as I'd like to, but Professor Christine Desarnes at Harvard University Law School has done work on the evolution of monetary systems in post-Roman Britain. And there's one particular instance where a king, of course there were many kings in England at that stage, basically the guy with the biggest army was the king, whatever region you're talking about. Somewhere located in England, let's say it was in Surrey, invented a form of credit, which was pretty much, I think that we may be neither the tally sticks or the precursor to tally sticks, to enable taxation and also to enable commerce. And what happened was, what had been a fairly primitive subsistence economy with only minor amounts of trade occurring very rapidly became a commercial economy with a dramatic increase in productivity. So in that case, the state providing the state effectively provided the money in that case. In other cases, there are points where it was a form of, again, I'm paraphrasing what I've read in anthropological research, but something that evolved more in a private system, a sort of a landlord approach, where landlords would use forms of credit to require landless labourers to work on their land, or to take over small holders and things like that. And also often it revolved out of the religious institutions. So if you think about the original human societies, which maxed out at about 150 people, according to a fabulous piece of research called the Dunbar number, about 150 was all we could keep in our heads, and people relationship with 150 different people and the relations they each had with each other. That's the limit of our brain power. And in those societies, it was a mutual gift situation. So, I'd gift you let's say I was a good manufacturer. I'd gift you a little Rode microphone, and you'd gift me back a tennis racket, et cetera, et cetera. And it was all gifting, and therefore a gift, as well as a gift being and giving to you, it also made you in a form of debt with the person who gave you that, and there's always this mutual reciprocal exchanges.
Right.
When you had the development of larger than 150 people groups, which largely involved hierarchy, and that's the word I want to come back to, a form of hierarchy to make it possible to interact with only 150 people yourself, but to be part of a society which might be 10 times or 100 times that size. As that started to evolve, the responsibility of keeping track of these interpersonal obligations started to devolve towards the witch doctors, in that case, the priests of those early societies. And then when the priesthood became itself institutionalized in a religious institution, that was the one that kept the records. It also was a commercial venture as well. And with the combination of the two, you had the formation of the state coming out of a religious system.
So there's no need for record keeping in this scenario, though, because it's Robinson Crusoe, Man Friday, and Woman Saturday. And I've introduced money, and the money, or he has, I should say. Oh, look, I'm going to be Robinson Crusoe just to make it easy. So I've introduced money, and the money I've introduced is just the coins that I managed to take off the ship. So I've got a finite supply of them. So the money supply is not changing at all. But he's making everyone work harder because they want to get their bit of that money. And then I'm getting it back again because they're paying for stuff like the food, for example, that they're making for themselves. Now, Woman Saturday realizes that there's something she can provide that both me, as Robinson Crusoe, and Man Friday want that we can't provide ourselves. I mean, she's a woman. So she starts, these are very primitive times. She starts charging for sex. She realizes she can charge a lot for it.
Mate, we're going totally off the politically correct scale here. But anyway, lead down the track.
Well, no, this is because it's hypothetical. Not saying it's good or right. We're not making a judgment. We're just saying she realizes she can.
I'm just been celebrating Gay Pride here week in Amsterdam, by the way.
Well, there we are. So maybe Man Friday could have charged as well. But in this scenario,
of course, they're getting slightly.
In this scenario, you can't charge as much as Woman Saturday. So she starts charging. She charges a lot. And as a result, she gets most of the food. She gets total access to this radio, the only form of entertainment we've got. How can we stop her dominating the economy so much now? Do I, as Robinson Crusoe, have to form a monopolies commission? What do I do to control this imbalance?
Okay, well, that is an interesting scenario, because what you've got effectively is hoarding going on. You said you've got a fixed supply of money. Yep. You said there's one of the three parties that is accumulating most of that money in her account, and the other two are going down. So we have Crusoe Friday and Saturday. Those are our three bank accounts. There's a fixed amount of money circulating, so effectively they're storing their own accounts in physical coin, but that's circulating. One of them is accumulating more and more of it to get more power. But by accumulating, one way you accumulate is you either charge more for what you get, or you spend less, or a bit of both. You're talking about, by the sounds of it, a bit of both. And what happens is you slow down the rate at which that money turns over, and the GDP of the economy actually starts to fall.
Mm. So what do I do about that then? Do I start saying, well, look, I'm going to put the maximum price on services? Do I start to offer sort of controls like that into the economy?
Hoarding is one of those things which people think is good for themselves, and therefore they extrapolate it must be good for the whole society. This is what Schäuble was doing fundamentally with the Eurozone, by saying that if we spend less and we accumulate a surplus, that's fantastic. The trouble is, if you all try to do it, nobody can accumulate more coins than currently exist. You've got a fixed supply of the coins. All that happens is the coins turn over more slowly, and your GDP, which is what you're trying to increase, actually falls. So it's counterproductive thinking, typical thinking about an individual part of a system and not the entire system itself. So if you want to actually solve it, the simplest way to do it is to put a demurrage on the coins themselves. You have the coins devaluing the longer they stay inside somebody's possession. So you label them all, and you keep some sort of time record of how long they're staying in one spot. And the longer they stay in one spot, the less they're worth until they're used to buy something off somebody else.
Sounds very complicated, doesn't it? Given that, such a primitive economy. But look, I've also got the problem now that Man Friday has discovered in the stream nearby where we're living that there's gold in the stream, quite a lot of it. And he and I, because remember, I'm Robinson Crusoe, we managed to melt it down to make coins, quite a lot of them. So all of a sudden I don't have that problem of hoarding anymore because there's so many more coins. So what happens next? I mean, I guess the issue is, this could create inflation, couldn't it? That we're going to need more and more of those coins to buy the basic things that we were buying before.
Well, you haven't got much of a production system going here so far. You've got three commodities by the sound of it. You haven't identified two of those commodities are out of the three. So you've now got a big problem if you're starting to confuse your monetary system with your production system. And that's a recipe for the sort of nonsense we're experiencing today. So, who's making what that's needed by each, that the money is part of the way of purchasing. What's your production economy there? Who's making what?
Woman Saturday is making love. Man Friday is going out and catching all the fish. And I guess I'm the central banker now all of a sudden because money has become such an important part of the economy. This is where I come from. Obviously, before I was. I worked in the city before.
You're a central banker who managed to avoid the flood.
Yeah. So I'm dealing with the money. That you're right. That's all we've got going for us, basically. But we are looking after Maslow's hierarchy of needs, pretty much. At least the very bottom level of that, aren't we? We're getting our needs satisfied. But so do we need more money? How do we get that?
Well, this is part of the problem again about how one thinks about a monetary system, because the emphasis on sound money, which is the ideology that began back in the the sort of 1800s in Britain and still dominates how politicians think about it today, really is about managing your money and using it frugally and carefully. That's the secret for growth. But in fact, a growing economy, almost without fail, it is very, very hard to find any instances of an economy in history which has grown without a growing supply of money at the same time. So if you don't have the nominal system growing, the real doesn't grow either. And that's because fundamentally one of the ironic things about the words that economists use is that nominal is real and real is nominal, because when you say nominal, you say actually this is the dollar price I'm paying for something. It's actually a set quantity that you're using where you actually can nail down the number of dollars, the number of coins, whatever else. When we talk about real, to produce the concept of real, we have to deflate that total nominal by some index process, so that in that sense the real is a fiction that we derive by indexing and changing it. But nonetheless, when you measure what is the scale of physical output of this economy, then that only tends to grow when the monetary system that's enabling the monetary system enabling the purchases of those products is itself growing.
Right.
So the big question becomes, how do you make the money supply grow reliably? Now, your situation at the moment is digging up little bits of yellow rock and melting them down and making them into similes of the coins you stole from the Bank of England when it went under during the flood you managed to escape from.
Exactly. That is exactly what I'm doing, and we're not producing any more. But then, look, there's another development, because all of a sudden, onto the beach floods a whole load of people who come from a village on the other side of the island. They've spent years cutting a path through the centre of the island, and then finally they find us on this beach. They've been surviving on bartering. There's a couple of hundred of them, and they do all sorts of stuff. They make all sorts of interesting clothes, particularly the clothes. They've got all sorts of food. They have a far more interesting diet than we've got on our side of the island. They've built some pretty nice houses as well. And so I think, well, look, this is all good. I'm going to introduce them to this gold money. I really am making myself this new central banker now. So was that a smart move on my part? And how do I keep all this money in order?
I think we've actually jumped from Robinson Crusoe to Star Trek here, because you wouldn't get a society that sophisticated based on barter in the first place.
Well, I mean, they somehow have managed. I mean, maybe they have some sort of rudimentary money system. Maybe
the 150 people. They're just they're a typical hunter-gatherer society at the time, with the richness of products they can pull out of the plants, but they've got no actual agriculture. Yeah. So if you're going to have any way to impact on this society, it isn't money you're going to need so much, because they'd have their own system of customary trust, and they'd wonder why the hell you were bothering with these little beads, unless you were,
No, they like them. So, I mean, what's actually happening is the village elder is keeping a record of, who owes what to who. Pretty much as you were describing, the work of priests. But they like my coins. They shine in the daylight. And I explain to them, by changing hands. I even convinced them that what it's done for us, it's actually made us more productive, because everyone's fighting to get more and more of these gold coins, and they like that idea. So I've sold them on it. They've bought it, and we've got this unified currency across the island now.
Mm-hmm. Or you might actually have yourself becoming a religious leader at this stage.
Well, that sounds good. Well, because they're clearly buy anything. They'll be convinced of anything. Is that the argument?
Well, yeah.
Presumably, though, injecting money into what's sort of like a reasonably developed economy is going to help production even more so, isn't it? Just as you explained it did when there was just the three of us. Well,
it could give them, like, if you've got a society of 150 people and you're talking a typical hunter-gatherer society that's wandered into your little beach, then that society is small enough that people keep track themselves, but you're getting to the point where maybe the religious leader in the group is more inclined to hold the details of who owes what. He's the arbiter. He or she is the arbiter of who owes what to whom. If it ever comes to a dispute, you're going to convince that person to use these little tokens you've got to keep track of these things. And rather than having to keep it in his or her mind, they can have little piles of metal that they use to indicate who owes what. And this indeed is what seems to be the case with early Sumerian society, because we all know of the cuneiforms, with the cuneiform tablets, which were used as a form of writing with those strange little wedges on the outside. It turns out that before those evolved, there were little clay containers, which inside those clay containers would have little models of a cow, a sheep, a goat, some wheat, etc., etc. And that was actually the way these records were stored, by putting them inside clay containers and just made little things out of clay, which signified, in that sense, it was the fact that they signified an obligation rather than being a point exchange, a barter exchange. They signified an obligation, and that was the form of credit. And the language apparently evolved, the writing language of Sumerian civilization evolved out of realizing that rather than putting the objects inside the clay container, they could put marks on the surface of the clay container which were easier to look at and keep a record of it. And then that's where cuneiforms evolved from. So in that sense, what you're saying is forget about little rather than because you've got gold already, you've landed in from the 19th century or thereabouts. You've said, well, we can jump over the clay tablets, just use the little pieces of gold as the same way of forming a credit relation, which will enable you to have a much more complicated societies, so you can start bickering at each other more effectively.
Well, I mean, and one of the things we'll bicker about, obviously, is how much tax everyone pays, because you've got to maintain that path that's built between the two sides of the island, and there's a few other, obviously, community services we've got to provide. But the other problem I'm now facing is that the other villagers on the other side of the island work very hard. They make nicer food. People are prepared to pay more. They're not really too much interested in anything Man Friday or Woman Saturday produces. Much more attractive women on their side of the island as well. And so they're making more money than Man Friday or Woman Saturday. And some of them decide that, this side of the island is the better side of the island. So they give Man Friday and Woman Saturday a bit of money to buy their huts right on the beach in the shade with a nice cool breeze. So Man Friday and Woman Saturday lose where they were living. They haven't got too much money. And they're starting to think, this money thing isn't a good idea after all. We seem to be coming off worse out of all of this.
That does tend to happen, doesn't it? And this is one thing which is forgotten in economic theory, and it annoys me when I talk, particularly to Austrian economists who don't take this into account. You haven't got the son and daughter of Man Friday and Woman Saturday yet. Yeah. But what we tend to have is that we inherit the position that the previous generation had. And when you talk about how free trade works really well and it's fair, et cetera, it's only fair in the context of a zero-generational society, because if in the next generation you inherit the wealth that or the poverty that your family had, you're starting behind the eight ball. It's not fair. And yet I've yet to see any Austrian economists support something like 100% wealth tax, which is the only way to maintain that idea that what you actually end up with at the end of your life is a product of how you manage your life during it, rather than who is your mammy and who is your daddy. Yeah, so Man Friday and Woman Saturday, obviously there will be children, because we've already established her profession, and so there's probably going to be lots of them. If I get ribs from this thing, mate, you're paying for it anyway. Then they are going to be very poor, because they, as you say, because they're not inheriting any wealth, whereas all the villagers are on the other side. Look, the villagers have decided now they don't like my currency very much because I've got all the control. So they start their own currency. I'm not quite sure what they're making it out of. It's not gold, but they've found something else. So how do we determine, what their currency is worth now versus the currency we've got on our side of the island? We've got this exchange control problem now. We know they're producing a lot more than we are, but maybe there's one. But we know also we're on a nice side of the island, so they want to buy land on our side of the island, I guess. So how do we determine, what the exchange rate is between our two currencies? Well, it sounds like you're starting to get a bit of the situation I'm finding myself with modern monetary theory right now, having a dispute about their analysis of trade, because what you were effectively doing beforehand was saying we can just use our little bits of effectively paper, your little pieces of gold, as a way of giving stuff in one direction and getting back what they produce on the other side, because, quote unquote, imports are a benefit and exports are a cost. But now you're getting into my end of the spectrum, where I'm saying, well, you're giving away so many of your paper rights. You've sold the huts that are necessary to finance that gap, and you don't have any assets anymore. So in that case, your currency is likely to plunge against the value of the village currency, become worthless. Even though it's gold, they don't care. They don't know what gold is. They're just saying, yes, our currency is worth more.
All right. So I'm pretty screwed.
Well, our economy generates more than your economy does. We've got a stronger industrial base, dare I use the word.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is like where we start saying, yes, so the balance of trade is very important for the value of your currency.
That's the perspective I want to analyse, because it's modern monetary theory and I share the common foundation of saying you've got to look at monetary flows. Every monetary flow starts somewhere and ends somewhere, and therefore you see the impact of taxes as taking money that's been created by the government out of its own spending, government spending being a net benefit without imposing a cost on the person who receives the money. Private banks giving you money but giving you debt at the same time, so no increase in your net financial assets, et cetera, et cetera. And then we bring in the issue of trade. And if you have the type of system you're talking about, then you can only continue using a little pieces of gold as a way of getting the resources from the other side if your gold continues to be valued as you'd like it to be valued. But if you're not the dominant currency on the planet, in this particular case it sounds like you're not the dominant currency on your island, then I think your currency is going to plunge at some stage, and what you can buy is going to decline. Unless you start producing something, your economy is going to tank.
Yeah, well, there's the problem. You see, we produce very little. As you say, the assets we've got can be bought. On the other side of the island, they're very productive. So that explains all of that. But as chance would have it, Man Friday builds a boat, and he discovers half an hour away there is an inhabited island, and as luck would have it, it's a tax haven filled with big international banks. And he mentions gold, and they want to buy it. They want to buy our coins, and they say, we're going to give you US dollars for it. And we go, well, that's fine. So we get all these US dollars coming in rather than gold, and we start using that as our currency. And then we find we can buy all sorts of things with these US dollars. You can buy televisions and iPads and prepackaged food, stuff that we could sell to workers on the other side of the island. But they're not going to be able to afford them, are they? Because, or do I just sell them cheaply to them? Because I'm still sort of cut off from the rest of the world. I'm really just trading with this one island that's giving me all these US dollars. What do I do now?
It sounds like you're researching a science fiction script here.
It's coming out with a few interesting theories, though. It's helping explain when you're not convinced. Well, I'm learning a bit from you on this.
Well, I'm still wondering, when you're buying, so you've got the gold you can sell for the dollars, then you get the dollars, and you want to you can buy all these fancy products that are coming from the other island. And so what you're going to try to do is use envy to get the people on the other side with the positive, with the productive monetary and physical system.
Those productive bastards on the other side of the island that have screwed our economy, we want to get back at them. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so they're not going to want the dollars you've got, and to get the dollars they might buy the gold, so your gold's going to rise in value, and your currency will therefore be able to buy more stuff from their side of the island, as well as buying the iPads. But by this stage, you've probably introduced the same sort of dilemmas shown in that wonderful South African movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, where when you throw an object which cannot be reproduced and is in limited supply into a society where there was no such concept of things which could be in limited supply compared to the population, you start causing social breakdown. So I imagine at this stage you've got a good increasing murder rate. They're buying guns to shoot each other and hopefully also shoot you.
So the money's not been good for us, has it, really? We would have been better off. The problem seemed to have started when we introduced money.
Well, I think this is one of my perspectives on human society in general, that if you just simply even land in an aeroplane, you've got to admire the quality of human engineering and what we've managed to achieve in terms of physical systems of incredible complexity that give us a level of status of energy consumption, at the level of power we all consume to have a pleasant life these days, that even going back 1 or 2 centuries, would be rival what kings or queens had as their wealth at the time. So it's incredible what we've done with our technology. The one thing we've completely stuffed up is the monetary system. We've never understood how to make it work properly. We always misunderstand how it functions in the first place. And most of our disasters come out of it. And that's one of my favorite lines in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, was where Douglas Adams explained that there's a little planet where everybody's very unhappy and they're always trying to work it out. And always the solutions involved the movement of little green pieces of paper, which is strange, really, because on the whole, it wasn't little green pieces of paper that were.
They weren't happy.
Yeah,
exactly. And they still were more concerned about how they could move those bits of paper around more quickly. On our island, I guess that, because they are now connected to the outside world, even the people on the productive side of the island are going to find, ultimately, people on the mainland can do a lot of their work cheaper. Because they're going to use mechanization. All they can do is sell the raw materials on the island. They're not going to survive too well, are they?
This tends to be the problem. That's why I think you have to, if you're going to have a theory of economics, it can't just be about money, though, of course, it has to understand money properly. It's also got to be about how you grow your physical capabilities over time. And I presume you're back in a world where global warming doesn't matter, in your little hypothetical universe. So in that world, you grow your productivity by increasing the amount of energy you can harness to produce output, which industrialization lets you do. And if you have an industrialized society coming up against a non-industrialized society, the non-industrialized society can't produce anything as elaborate or as energy transforming as the advanced society does, and it becomes a backwater.
Well, presumably, if they hadn't made that connection with the outside world, and money was being used to increase productivity or consumption, then you would hit the point at some point where resources would run out, where resources would run dry.
Certainly on a small island that can happen. I mean, that's the classic case of that is Nauru, which its wealth was literally the result of bird droppings. And you had an enormous amount of phosphate on that island, which was then mined for fertilizer around the rest of the world in particular, and made Nauru quite wealthy. At one stage, one of the biggest buildings in Melbourne was Nauru House, and the idea was that the island was going to manage these resources well by turning the bird shit into money, putting the money in accounts and managing it well for the population. And unfortunately, I think they got caught up in a couple of Ponzi schemes and property bubbles and share price bubbles and collapses, and wiped out most of the money. And that's why that poor country is now home to Australia's leading refugee prison, which along with Manus Island and Nauru became prisons for the Australian population to put people who are trying to get there as refugees from the rest of the world. So, yeah, it ends up being pretty lousy when you run out of your resources. I'm
not quite sure what we've learned from this episode, but actually, there is an interesting comparison, which is the Clunas-Ross family and the Cocos-Keeling Islands off the west coast of Australia. The Clunas-Ross family took over the island, and this is about the time of Queen Victoria, and they had supplies. The natives there had supplies of jute. So they used to mine or forest jute and export it. And John Clunas-Ross basically paid the workers in a currency that he created, which could only be spent in the shop which he ran. So he was for a while running his own economy, but he had an input, because he had all the exports, so he had money coming into the economy. But it carried on that way until the United Nations actually ruled that wasn't the way to run a country, and it was handed over to, ultimately the island was sold to Australia, which is why it became part of the Australian territory. So there's an interesting case study there of an isolated economy.
Yeah, and that's one worth exploring. And what you get is a class system. And this is what is also left out of most thinking about money. When you have the idea of the barter economy and so on, even though people talk about Man Friday and Robinson Crusoe, and there's clearly going to be a class relationship there, they don't look at the way in which capitalism itself is a class system. And you have what actually often determines whether you can become a capitalist is whether you get access to money. Whether you can get whether it's possible to have money lent to you or get money from a bank and so on, and that access to money is what enables you to become a capitalist in the first place. And then, of course, when you pass it on for a future generation, you get an inherited class structure, which is the one we're living in these days. But yeah, the Clunies-Ross was a classic instance of that being so extreme that you really had capitalism turning into feudalism.
Yeah. All right, very good. As I say, I'm not sure what we learned. We did get a bit of a history lesson, and I think we did highlight a couple of issues with money there. So a worthwhile exercise. We don't need to do it again, but thank you for your time, Steve.
Welcome, mate.
That was my idea, by the way. I'm not sure Steve was entirely convinced, but there we are, the hypotheticals of Robinson Crusoenomics. And that is it for this time on the Debunking Economics podcast. It was a bit of fun, wasn't it? Surely. And we'll be back again with another one next time. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for listening. I'll see you then.